Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, they're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we are talking about one of my favorite movies. It's a recent one, obviously. I mean, you guys know from the title. You guys clicked on it. It's Parasite 2019, Korean film, directed by Bong Joon-ho. It's also the first non-English language movie to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Not Best Foreign Language Film, not Best International Film, just Best Picture overall. So very impressive, and God was it deserving of it, because this movie is amazing. I really hope everybody got a chance to watch it. If not, I highly suggest you turn this episode off and come back to it after you've seen it, because this movie is nuts, and the less you know about it going in, the better. Okay, so let's get into it. Parasite. Alright, so we open on a lower class family, lower income family. They're hanging out at their house. They're living in like a semi basement, so like you could it's like half basement, half above ground, and they're trying to get some Wi-Fi from upstairs. They usually steal from the upstairs lady, but she put a password on it, so now they're like trying to crack the password or see if there's any other free Wi-Fi around. So they're struggling, but it's like you could tell they're like a very close family, tight knit, but just struggling money wise. Kind of panning through the apartment, we get a couple shots of like how they live and everything. You find out that the dad is an Olympic silver medalist, so he was an Olympian and everything, and that just kind of shows like you could be an Olympic medalist, and that doesn't guarantee you're going to be living the good life for the rest of your life, and I don't think that's unique to South Korea by any means. I feel like there's probably quite a lot of Olympians here in the States that are the same thing. Like not everyone's a household name like Michael Phelps or Usain Bolt. So, if once you get that medal, then it's just kind of, that's it. That's your 15 minutes of fame. All right. Moving on. One of the ways that they're making money is folding pizza boxes. So they got a job from this local pizza chain, and they're folding up the boxes and everything. That way the workers there don't have to do it. So they're looking up a YouTube video on how to like fold them fast and everything like that. At this point, the fumigators are coming down the street and like spraying bug spray all over the place in the alleyway, and they're like, oh no, like the fumigators are here, close the window. And then the dad says, no, like leave them open, then we get a free fumigation, because earlier you see a stink bug climbing around on the table, and he flicks it off, so now they can get rid of the bugs for free. But then they're sitting in there breathing that like fumigation gas, so I don't know like what's better. And they're also like folding pizza boxes for a pizza chain, so now all that like bug spray is getting on the pizza boxes, so not very sanitary. But hey, you gotta do what you gotta do. They so now the CEO of the pizza place is there, because it's just a local place, so it's just the girl that owns it. She's telling them like, hey, like these boxes are messed up, like a quarter of them are wrong. And then it's they all look at the dad, because he's the one that was like doing it too fast. He got a little overconfident with the YouTube video and thought that he could just knock them out like real quick. And she's like, well, a quarter of them are wrong. And so they know like, well, there's 4 of them, and he's the one that was going too fast. And so they knew it was him, and he knew too. So they're gonna like, hey, we're not gonna pay you as much, we're gonna knock 10% off. and they're, obviously upset about that. It's like, hey, like, we worked hard on these, like, we, deserve the money. And she's like telling them, like, well, like, if a quarter of them are wrong, then 10% is pretty generous. I could knock off 25%. So they like they end up talking her out of it and everything, and then it goes to them eating dinner. They're sitting at the table, and they could see up in the window that there's a drunk guy peeing all over the place, and they're like, hey, like, someone needs to stop him, and like, we should have put a sign up because this keeps happening. But then one of the son's name is Kiwoo. His friend Min shows up on a scooter and like starts yelling at the drunk guy, like, hey, get out of here, and everything like that. And the parents are all impressed with, like, oh, some friend you got there, like, he's like, oh, college boy and everything, so kind of just like impressed with him, but also like a little bit like passive aggressive, like, maybe like you should do something like that, like go to college. But not too, like, they're not too pushy or anything like that. They are just like, hey, like, we're all struggling, so we're in this together. So he brings over like, Min has this gift for them. Like, I guess they were cleaning out his grandparents' house, and the grandpa had like all these rocks, I guess, like these big fancy rocks. And I guess that's a thing. Like, I saw a little bit in an interview with the director, Bong Joon-ho, and he's talking about how that's like a symbol of the upper class, is to have these rocks, like these fancy rocks. Like, it's a rich people activity that like something you wouldn't even know about unless you like were a rich person, that type of thing. So he gives them the rock, and the Kiwoo's impressed with it. The dad is also impressed with it. What's the Kai-tek? I don't know. It might just be easier to say Mr. Kim, because I don't want to keep butchering it. If I do have it wrong, I don't want to keep saying it wrong, because I'm too busy like watching or reading the subtitles to listen to the pronunciation. So I should have went back and did that. So my apologies, but I don't want to keep messing up. So Mr. Kim, the dad, he's also impressed with the rock and everything, and the mom's just like, well, like, food would have been better, but like she kind of says it under her breath, and the daughter, Ki Jung, hits her like, hey, like, quiet, like, don't say that too loud. So then Min and Kiwoo go out for drinks. They're sitting at a little like outdoor, not cafe, but like just a little outdoor restaurant. And Min saying like, hey, like, I'm going abroad for school, but I have this job teaching English to this rich high school girl, and I think you should take over. And he's like, well, why me? Like, why not one of your university buddies? And he's like, oh, like, I don't want these frat guys like drooling all over her, like, I'd rather it be someone I trust, because you find out that Min likes her, and he's like, oh, like, I'm going to study abroad, and then when I come back and she's old enough to be in college, then I'm going to ask her out. So, and he's like, oh, but I trust you. And he's like, well, like, I don't have, like, don't have to be a college student or something like that. And he's like, well, just fake it, you know English probably better than any of my university friends, because you've taken the entrance exam 4 times and you've been in the military. So, like, there you go. Because in South Korea, they do have a mandatory military service. That's a lot of countries have that. I know Israel does too, but those are the only 2 I know for sure. So he's like, well, with your service and the fact that you've taken this entrance exam, like, you're gonna have no problem teaching English to somebody. And it's kind of just like, hey, like, just fake it till you make it. And he's like, well, your sister, she's all artsy, right? Like, is she good with Photoshop? Have her make some fake documents, because they're, and plus it's going to be easy to fool the mom because she's kind of simple, is what he says. He's like young and simple, so it's like, okay, like, so he thinks the mom's dumb, so she's going to be easily manipulated into thinking that he's the real deal. So flash to Ki-woo and Ki-jung at the like an internet cafe, and she's doing Photoshop and making this fake degree and stuff like that, all these credentials and everything. And then once he has those fake documents, he goes for his interview and gets to the house. He's all impressed. He's looking around like, wow, like this place is huge. Has a lady answers the door, and he thinks that that's the mom, and she's like, no, I just work here. And you find out that's the housekeeper. And so he goes in, just looking around the house and everything, and the housekeeper goes to get the lady of the house, Mrs. Park. Yeon Kyo is her full name. Lang Kyo, or Park Yeon Kyo, because I forgot that in Korea you put the last name first, or the family name first. But before she goes to get the mom, she's like saying, like, because she notices he's checking out the house, and he's like, oh, she said it's built by this famous architect, Namgung, and he built it for himself. He lived there for a while, and he was the previous owner. So basically, he built it, and then when I think he moved, and then that's when the Park family moved in. I don't think he died. I think he did move. I mean, that's not that important. But so he's interviewing with the mom, and she's saying like, oh, like the documents are impressive, but I'm not too worried about that. Like, I need to know if you're up to the level of Min, because I liked him, my daughter liked him, like he's great, and so I need to know that you're like capable. So I'm gonna sit in on the first session with you. And he's like, okay, he agrees to do that. So they're going over the daughter's homework. The daughter's name is Dahai, and she's like she's like struggling with something, and she kind of like puts the wrong answer, and now this is time. This is Ki-woo's time to shine. Oh, by the way, he's going by Kevin with them, because it's like, oh, like, let me get an American name to show that, like, that I know English. That basically, it's just kind of one, like, he's hiding who he really is, but also is there to show, like, hey, like, I know English and everything like that. So he's like kind of showing off his chops and everything. It's like, hey, like, you got that wrong. Like, if you put that on an exam, you'd be screwed and everything like that. So he's like kind of like doing like a little bit of a power move, like for the daughter and the mom. And they're like, oh, like, so the mom's like fully impressed at this point. Like, so she's buying into it. They're going back downstairs. You see the son of the rich family, Da-song, and he's running around. He's got like a native headdress on, and they're saying like, oh, he's obsessed with, as they say in the movie, the American Indian, but indigenous to the Americas. And then they're also saying like, oh, he's also like an artist. And the mom's showing Ki-woo Kevin, the painting that Da-song painted, and it's like, it's very abstract and everything. And then Ki-woo's like, oh, like, what, like, oh, yeah, this is really good. What is it, a chimpanzee? And the mom's like, no, it's a self-portrait. But she's not like offended or anything, but because he's like still playing it off like, wow, like the artistic mind of a child is so hard to interpret or something like that. So he says like some fancy saying, and she's like, oh yeah, like now I'm like really impressed. And then so she's like, well, he's like, as he's leaving after he gets paid and everything, like he's talking to the mom and he says, hey, like, because the mom had mentioned that like she's tried art lessons for the song, and that it's hard to like maintain a tutor because he's kind of a difficult child and things like that. So, and so he has the idea. It's like, hey, like like in his head, like he's thinking, hey, my sister, she's artsy, you know, so maybe she can pull off the same kind of trick that I'm doing. And he's like, hey, like, my cousin's college roommate was an art major, and she's been tutoring here in Korea, like after she came back from the States. So, like, if you want, I can try to get a hold of my cousin to get her information and have her come interview for you. And the mom's like, oh, like that'd be great and everything. Just have her come, you know, such and such a day, and then we'll see how it goes. So then they got to make fake documents for Ki Jung, and so she's going by Jessica. That's her like alias for this whole ruse. And so she's there. She's playing it a little more assertive than Ki Woo was. So when the mom's like, oh, I'm gonna sit in on the first lesson, and she's like, no, I don't allow parents in the room, like it's a one-on-one thing. And the mom's like all anxious about that, and she's like, you see her like sitting at the kitchen table, like with her bouncing her leg, like not sure what to do. And she's like tells the housekeeper like, hey, like take some drinks in there, and that way you could see what's going on, because you just said no parents, she didn't say anything about you. And she's like, oh, okay, like, and she's gonna go along with the plan too. So but as they're coming upstairs with the drinks, they see that she's already down at the table with the song, and he's like being like super polite, and he stands up, he bows to her, and then like walks off. So it's like she's like, wow, like she's just whipping my crazy son into shape and everything like that, and he's like being well behaved, like, so she's the real deal. And she's just like talking about like using all these buzzwords like art therapy and art psychology, and just really hyping herself up like, hey, this is all the things I know. And she's like, hey, like I studied these, did anything traumatic happen to Desong in the first grade? And the mom like gasps really loud and like covers her mouth like, oh my god, like something did happen. And they're like, Ki Jung's like, okay, like, well, like with this art therapy we can get to the bottom of it and see like what like affected him. She doesn't go into what happened yet, like that comes later in the movie. So that works, you know. Now two of the members of the family are in there as like pretending not to know each other and just getting money from this rich family and everything. So also as Jessica, or as I put Jessica, as Ki Jung is there interviewing Dahai, the rich daughter, is like spying on her and everything, like, and she's getting jealous, like, oh, like she's really pretty, and she confronts Ki Woo Kevin to her, hey, like, do you think Jessica's pretty? And he's like why, like, you know, like, yeah, she's attractive, but I'm not interested. And she's like accuses him like, no, like that's not your cousin's friend, that's your girlfriend. And he's like, no, and he just like laughs at her and everything. And then they go back to their lesson, but then they like lock eyes and they end up kissing each other. So okay, right about the end, like once Ki Jung / Jessica has the job, we see the dad come home. And something interesting is that like as he's walking up the stairs, each light above him illuminates. So that's kind of interesting. choice there. More on that later. And so we're introduced to Mr. Park. Dong Ik is his name, and he has his driver take Jessica home. And so as she's getting driven home, she's like, "Oh, just drop me off at the subway station." And he's being persistent, like, "No, I could take you home. Like, where do you live?" And she's like, "No, I'm not going to tell you where I live." One, just to like, hey, don't be a creep. But two, you know, we don't want to know like that she lives in the poor part of town, you know, because she's putting on this facade that she's wealthy. Anyways, so as he's like being persistent and everything, and she finally like shuts him up, like, "I'm meeting my boyfriend there," and he's like, "Oh, okay," you know, and then he like leaves her alone. But then she gets an idea, like, like this guy's like asking me where I live and everything, and he's like, it may be creepy, but it may be fine, but that gives me an idea. And she slides her panties off like while she's sitting back there without being too obvious, like she kind of like sneakily does it, and then leaves them like down on the floor of the car. So this comes back later. She's gonna try to frame him for being a pervert, basically. And the reason she's doing this, and we come like once she gets home, she asks her dad, Mr. Kim, and like, "Hey, have you ever driven a Benz before?" And he's like, "Yeah, like I think I have," like because he used to be a driver like way back. And so they're having this conversation, like asking if he's driven a Benz before. And then they're all eating together again, and like just kind of making fun of the family. Like I forget what specifics, but they're just kind of joking around, like, "Oh, like they're so snooty, and the kid is crazy." And then she's like laughing, like, you know, like I just Googled art therapy and just remembered some keywords and threw them out there. Like I just ad-libbed, basically. And so as Mr. Park is getting driven the next day, he looks down and sees the panties on the floor and picks them up, but he doesn't say anything right then and there. And once he puts them in like a little envelope because he has like some papers with them, and makes sure that the housekeeper's not around, and then shows his wife, and she's like gasps and everything because she's very dramatic. And they're like, "Oh, you know, he left this in the car," and he's like, "Where does he get off like having sex in my car?" and stuff like that. And like I bet he gets off on it and stuff like that. And it's like, you know, like I understand like having like a hair left behind or a couple different things, but who forgets their panties? And then he's like, "Oh, I bet this girl wasn't in her right mind," and like whispering, like, "I bet she was like a meth head or cocaine or something like that." And then, you know, the wife's getting all dramatic again, like screaming and stuff. And then, so as they're having this conversation, Ki-jung, Jessica, is around the corner, and she's like eavesdropping a little bit, like, okay, it's like it worked, like he found them. So now I can move on to the next step of the plan. And then she comes down the stairs, and it's like, "Oh, like, you know, lesson went well and everything." And then, so as she's leaving, the wife is walking her out and says, like, "Hey, like, when the driver took you home, did he like, how was he? Like, was he weird?" Like, you know, just kind of being vague, but also just trying to get some information. Like, did he make a move on you? That type of thing. And she's like, "Oh, like he was very persistent, like asking where I lived and everything." And she's like, "Oh, like you didn't tell him, did you?" And then she's like, "No, like I had him drop me off at the subway station." And then she has so then she's like, "Oh, like, well, I'm going to have to fire this driver because, you know, something happened." And she's like, "Well, like, if you're looking for a new driver, like, wouldn't it be better if, like, for to have like an older driver, like more distinguished and stuff like that, instead of this like young pervert guy. So she's like, oh, like I think it's supposed to be her uncle. I forget. It's like my father's brother. I think that's what it was. I forget like what the fake relation is, but she's suggesting her real dad, like, hey, like I know this guy, and he just became available. He used to drive for. Oh, no, it was okay. It was like someone who drove for her uncle. That's what it's supposed to be. So she's like, hey, like I know this guy and they moved, so I wonder if that guy's available, because like they, everyone like liked him and he was a really good driver. And she's like, oh, like that'd be great. Like give me his information. And so in order to like familiarize himself with Mercedes-Benz, they're at the dealership and just like looking at all the stuff. They're like sitting in the car, and the dealer's like, oh, okay, like the salesman's like, hey, like taking your time, aren't we? And then they're like, oh yeah, like we'll go. So they're just like they're checking it out and getting to know the car and everything like that. That way he can pull off this like test drive perfectly and everything like that. So the dad's there at Mr. Kim's at the office where Mr. Park works. That's where he meets him, and he drives him home, and he's nailing his first job. He's like taking the corner, and Mr. Park's just got like a regular coffee mug, as he's driving home. Like I would never do that, but maybe everyone drives the way they're supposed to in Korea, so it's not like you don't have to slam on your brakes like you do here in LA every 2 seconds. So he's nailing it. He's driving. He knows his way around. He turns off the GPS, and so he's just like Mr. Park's super impressed at this point. So now that's like, okay, we got 3 of us are infiltrated into this family, like 3 down, 1 to go, basically. So they're like, okay, like how do we get rid of this housekeeper? And Jessica's just talking about like, okay, like she's the housekeeper, she's been there forever. She acts like she owns the place because she's just so comfortable there and everything like that. Like, so you see like a short montage of her like with her feet up and everything, and just laying down and everything. And then, so they're like, okay, like we need some scheme to get rid of her. And they're just kind of brainstorming, but then like the next day, I don't know if it's the next day, but the next time you see, the next scene is Kevin with Dahai, and she's saying like, oh, like I wish we had some peaches. And he's like, oh, why don't you just like ask for some? And they're like, she says they're the forbidden fruit because Moon Guang, the housekeeper, is allergic to them, like really bad allergy for peaches. And so then like Kevin's like, well, shit, like now I know, like now I know what to do. So gets back to the house, and now they know that she has this peach allergy. So what they do is go and get some peaches, and kind of like I think they like take the fibers off, and then they like make her sick to where she goes to the hospital. And then Mr. Kim is there at the hospital, and takes a selfie with her in the background, like showing like, hey, like look, she was at the hospital. And she's on the phone with someone, we don't know who, and she's like, no, like I didn't have any peaches, like there's no peaches at the house, so I don't know why I'm like feeling like this. So then as he's with Mrs. Park soon, he's like, hey, like your housekeeper, I saw her at the hospital. Oh yeah, he shows her the picture first. It's like, hey, is this the housekeeper? And she's like, oh yeah, like, oh, okay, like I thought she looked familiar, but I've only seen her a couple times. So But the thing is, like, she was talking really loud on the phone, and I overheard her, like, because I was just there for my annual physical, but she seemed to be like coughing a lot and seemed like she was really sick, and she was talking really loud on the phone, and it sounds like, and she said she had tuberculosis, like TB, and so that Mrs. Parks just like freaking out, like, oh my god, like what are we gonna do? Like, I have to like get rid of her. Because like my husband will be so mad if I brought a TB patient into the house, and she's the one like cleaning and washing our dishes and making our food and everything like that. So that's just like not gonna do. So then as he's driving Mrs. Park home, then he like texts Jessica saying like, hey, we're only 4 minutes out. Like, now's the time. So she has like her little like bunch of peach fibers, like the peach fuzz, and walks behind the housekeeper, sprinkles them on the back of her neck to get her coughing, and it works because like as Mr. Kim and Mrs. Park are coming up the stairs into the house, there she is coughing, and she's like coughing into a tissue, and then drops it in the trash can, and like Mrs. Park's already like sold on it, like oh my god, she's sick, what am I gonna do? And then Mr. Kim puts down the groceries and goes over to the trash can, and he has a little packet of hot sauce that looks like blood, and so he real quick just pulls it out of his pocket, opens it, like squirts it onto the napkin that she was coughing onto, and lifts it out of the trash can and shows Mrs. Park the napkin with the quote unquote blood on it, and then she like looks like she's gonna faint because she just closes her eyes, but we don't see her like fall or anything like that. So then she calls Mr. Kim up into the second floor sauna room, like, hey, like meet me in here, like a secret meeting or whatever. And they're talking, and like about like I don't know what to do, like how am I gonna fire her, like. Then so they kind of just brainstorm, like, okay, like you don't have to say it's about that, like you don't have to say that you know that she's sick or anything like that. Because he doesn't want to bring that up, and he's like, yeah, don't tell her that I know or anything like that. And she's like, no, like I'll make up something else about it, you know. So that's like, because if she's just like, oh, like you can't work here because you have TB, and she's gonna be like, no, I don't have TB, I think it was an allergic, you know. So then their whole plan falls apart. But so she does fire her. We don't get to see the conversation, so I don't know what like she ends up telling her. And then to save her own ass, she's like, oh, I'm not going to tell my husband that she was sick or that I fired her, because then I have to, you know, come up with a reason to do that. So I'm just going to say that she quit. So we see the housekeeper. She's leaving. She's got her bags and everything, and she's very distraught, like as you would be, because she was the housekeeper to the architect as well. So she's been there longer than the family has, and just like very comfortable with that job, and like as any of us would be. And she does see, like in the times that you see her, like she's a very nice person, and she is like very good at her job, you know. But you know, they're trying to get the whole family in there, so you know, she was just the one that had to go. And so then the next day, or presumably, or a couple days later, Mr. Kim's driving Mr. Park home from work, and he's like, oh, like, do you know a place with, I think it's spare ribs or short ribs, I forget. But either way, like, he's looking for some ribs, braised short ribs, I think it is. I don't know. I wish I remembered. But he's asking, like, hey, do you know a good place? And he's like, yeah, like, for sure. It's like, all right, so we're eating out tonight, or you're eating out tonight? He's like, yeah, like, he's saying, like, I've been craving them ever since our housekeeper left, because like she used to make really good ones. Like I wish I knew why she quit and stuff like that, but hey, whatever. And it's like saying like, oh, like the house is gonna be a mess because my wife doesn't know how to clean, she doesn't know how to do any chores, she doesn't know how to cook, nothing like that. So it's just gonna be like a pigsty. And so Mr. Kim was like, hey, like I've heard of this service, and I have their business card, but they're like elite, veteran grade housekeepers, drivers. I forget what the other job was, and it's like, oh, like, well, how'd you come across them? He's like, oh, like, they called me trying to recruit me, but I had already accepted the interview with you. And so he's like, oh, okay. So he's impressed, and he hands him a business card, and it's like the like real simple business card and everything, very elegant looking. I think that's from a movie. I forget which movie, but they're talking about like the less things you have on there, the more like elite you seem on your business card. So they definitely like took that idea and ran with it. So he's like, oh, okay, like I'll give this to my wife, and we'll find, get someone. So Mrs. Park calls the number. Of course, it goes to a burner phone that Jessica has, and she's pretending to be the like front desk person for this company. And I think a couple of them talk on the phone, or they're just using different voices, something like that. And basically, I mean, obviously, the mom, Chung Suk, Mrs. Kim, is the one that shows up as the housekeeper. And so now all four of them are there working for this family. So at some point, we get a scene where the song comes in, and he like smells Mr. Kim, and then he goes over to Mrs. Kim and smells her, and he's like, hey, they smell the same. And parents are all confused, everyone's a little confused, and they're like, and the mom's like, okay, go upstairs to Jessica. And she's like, she smells the same too. So now they're like, oh, like shit, like now we all gotta use different shampoo, we gotta use different soap, and different laundry detergent, and like now we gotta like do 4 separate loads of laundry, that type of thing. So as they're having that conversation, the drunk guy's back, and he's peeing again, and then Kevin's like, okay, like I'm gonna put an end to this, and he picks up the rock like he's gonna go smash this guy in the head, and his dad's like, no, like use this instead. So it's just like a bottle of water. He's gonna like go spray him, and then we get like a nice slow-mo of him trying to spray the drunk guy with water, and the drunk guy's retaliating by trying to pee on him, and then here comes the dad with the bucket, so we get a bunch of like slow-mo water shots and everything like that, and Jessica's laughing and filming it on her phone. So really good scene. So then cut back to the Park family house, and they're about to go on a camping trip for Dasong's birthday. And so they're packing up, ready to go. They're going to be gone for the weekend. So we see Chung Suk. She's helping them pack and everything, and then she waiting in the garage while they pull out and everything, and waves goodbye to them and closes the garage door. And then we cut to her, and the whole family are there in the house, like, and they have it all to themselves. So they're just like, hey, like, we're gonna live it up for this weekend. We got the whole house to ourselves. We're gonna drink all this expensive liquor and eat all this nice food and sleep on these nice beds, and we got the whole house to ourselves. So we see them like relaxing. We see Jessica taking a bath, and Kevin's like reading Dahai's diary, and so they're just like having the time of their lives. And then so they're like talking a little bit about the family, and then saying like, oh, the mom, like like she's very she's rich, but she's nice. And the Jung Sook's like, yeah, like if I had all this money, I'd be nice too. It's just saying like you can afford to be friendly when you have nothing to worry about, basically. And then so as they're getting drunk and they each have like little outbursts here and there, then it's starting to rain and there's a lightning storm outside, and it's right as like Jessica yells something, and then the lightning strikes, and the Mr. Kim's like, wow, what timing, that was perfect. And so then he's just talking about like, hey, like, this is, right now this is our house, like we're the ones living here and everything like that, so let's just like pretend this is our house. And then Mrs. Kim's like, yeah, but if they walked in the door right now, like you'd all scurry like roaches, basically. And just kind of that, just a little kind of get into the metaphor that is the title of the movie, just a little like, hey, like it's this, they're leeching off this other family like a parasite, basically. That's not the only thing tying in. We'll more on that a little bit later. So as they're just like, so they just keep talking and keep drinking and everything like that. And then right as like there's a point where they're all laughing together, and then the doorbell rings and they all just freeze, like, okay, like what, why is the doorbell ringing, like who's gonna be here, like no, like everyone knows that they're on vacation, so why is someone here? And they go and they got like the video doorbell on like with like a little monitor, and so she could see that it's the old housekeeper, Moon Guang. And she's like, hey, like what do you want? And she's like, oh, like I used to be the housekeeper here. There's a picture of 3 dogs above the monitor, and she names the dogs and everything. So it's like, okay, like she's basically proving like, yeah, like I, that I know what I'm doing. Like I just proving her credentials, basically. It's like, so she could get let in. And she's like, well, what do you want? And she says like, oh, like I left in such a hurry that I forgot some stuff down in the basement. So would you be able to let me in? And she's very hesitant, but she does, like, okay, like maybe she'll just come in, get what she needs, and leave, That way it doesn't cause any, like, problems, and just kind of like, okay, like she's struggling too, kind of feeling bad that she pushed her out of a job. So, like, let me just help her out. So he lets her in, and she heads down to the basement, and she's like, oh, like, do you want to go with me? And she's like, no, you go ahead. And it's a really cool shot because she just, like, disappears into the stairway down to the basement, because it's just, like, pitch black down there. And it's very ominous, too, because it's like, okay, like, what is she really doing here? And she's, like, she's, like, it almost is a very different personality than what we've seen before. And she seems like very erratic, I think. A little manic, too. So she heads down to the basement, and then she's been down. So we see Mrs. Kim. She's, like, sitting in the kitchen, like, kind of head in her hands, just, like, waiting, like, okay. And then the other 3 are on the stairwell, and they're hiding because they're not supposed to be there. So it's like, so they can't be seen. Because what would the driver and 2 tutors be hanging out with the housemaid or housekeeper while the family's away, Very suspicious. So they're hiding, and then they're kind of like signaling her, like, hey, like, what's going on? And she's like, I don't know. And she's like, okay, like, I'm going to go down there and see what's going on. So they head down, or she heads down, and they, like, kind of go behind her, but, like, keeping their distance because they still want to be hidden, but they also want to know what's going on. She gets down to the basement and sees the old housekeeper is, like, feet on the wall and hands on a bookcase, and she's like up in the air, like pushing between those, and she's like like making that type of noise. So they're like, what the hell is going on? And then she's like, oh, can you help me move this? It's stuck. Like, and she's like, okay, like move the bookcase. It's like, okay, like, so Mrs. Kim is trying to pull on it, and she realizes there's this like metal platter down on the floor, and then that's what's blocking it. And so she pulls that out, and that causes the whole bookcase to move, and Moon Guang to fall and hit her face on the bench and roll off. And it's like, oh my God, are you okay? And then she's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. Like, I bet it scared you, didn't I? Or something like that. So then she gets up and run, like, and so, oh yeah, that's the other thing, is the bookcase moves and it reveals like a secret door. And so that's like, okay, what the hell's going on? And so she opens that door and runs into like this hallway, and then followed by a staircase, and starts going down the stairs. And she's screaming like, honey, honey. And Mrs. Kim turns around like, what the hell's going on? Like, and it's like starts following her down, like, to see what's going on. And it's like down a staircase, and then a hallway, and then down another staircase, and it's this like hidden like room like under the house, down in the basement, like the basement of the basement. And we see her run to a bed with a man on it, and she's like, oh, like, are you hungry? Like, I'm so sorry, like, how many days has it been and everything? And like the Kim family and us and the audience are like, what the hell's going on? Like, what is this? And so come to find out that this hidden bunker was built by the architect, and she's like, oh, a lot of the rich families have these bunkers, in case North Korea attacks or creditors break in, stuff like that. It's like basically like a panic room. But the architect, when he moved out, didn't tell the Park family about this secret room. And so because they never learned about it, after he moved out, the architect, and before the Park family moved in, she moved her husband down there because he is on the run from some loan sharks. And so they borrowed some money, he didn't pay it back, and so they like are coming after him. And they like needed a place to hide because otherwise he was going to get killed, probably, because they're probably some pretty shady loan sharks. And so he's just been living down there for 4 years, you find out. And she's like, and Mrs. Kim's like, so you just been stealing food from the family? And she's like, no, like, I buy all this food from my own salary and just bring it down when they're not looking or they're out of town or anything like that. So she's like, has a proposition for Mrs. Kim, like, hey, like, I'll give you money if you can come, like, bring food down here and stuff like that. And she's like thinking about it for a sec, but then the other three who are eavesdropping on the stairs slip and fall, and because it's like a big drop, it's almost like the height of 2 steps, but it's just one big step. So they slip and fall, and then they hit pretty hard on the concrete, and they're all like, and the old housekeeper, she's quick on the draw with her phone, and she's recording it, like, because she recognizes them, like, oh, like, that's the driver, that's the 2 tutors, like, what the hell are they doing here? But then Jessica makes the mistake of saying, like, oh, Dad, like, and then she's like, oh my God, like, they're all related, like, this is all one family. So then now she has blackmail material, because she's like, hey, like, you do what I want, otherwise I'm gonna send this to Mrs. Park. And they're like, oh God, like, because they're also like, she was threatening to call the police on her and everything like that. Like, you guys shouldn't be down here. But then now Moon Guang has the upper hand. Like, okay, like, here's the evidence right here. So they're kind of holding them hostage, like her and her husband. And she's got them over in the corner with their hands up on their hands and knees and everything, and just like threatening them, and then like joking around like, hey, like I'm Kim Jong-un, and like you're gonna listen to me and stuff like that. And she's like has like her that's why where that metaphor came from, is because the husband's like, hey, like this send button is like a nuclear launch button, basically, and it's like, we have so much power in our hands, we're like dictators. So that's where the Kim Jong-un thing comes from. So then as they're like gloating and everything, Mrs. Kim makes the move for it and just like rams the couch really hard. That knocks them both to the ground. The phone goes flying. Mr. Kim's going for it. He's trying to grab it, and then they're all like just fighting like Looney Tunes. Like, it might as well have been a cloud with like a random fist or foot coming out. They're struggling and everything, and one of them finally gets the phone, and they're like, delete it, But as Kevin has the phone, he's about to delete it, then the phone rings, and they all freeze, all of them, because none of them are supposed to be there. So, like, okay, like, what's happening? And so the one person who is supposed to be there, Mrs. Kim, she goes to the phone and picks it up, like, hello, and Mrs. Park's like, hey, like, do you know how to make ramdon? And like, if you start boiling the water now, it should be ready by the time we get home. And she's like, what are you talking about? What happened to camping? And she's like, oh, like the campsite flooded and everybody had to pack up their tents and go. So we're on our way home right now. And she's like, oh, like, how far are you? And she's like, we're 8 minutes away. So this is panic time for everybody. And she hangs up the phone and says, like, what the fuck is ramdon? And then so she's like going, I forget how she finds out, but it turns out to be it's ramen and udon mixed together, basically. So she's starting to cook, and just like cooking as fast as she can, while everybody else, while the kids are cleaning, and Mr. Kim is taking the old housekeeper and her husband back down to the basement, and he's tying them up and everything. And oh yeah, because that's I forgot to mention one of my favorite parts in the fight is Jessica runs to the refrigerator, grabs the bag of peaches, and dumps them on Moon Guang, and starts rubbing them all over her face. And I thought that was like that. I thought that part was really funny. So yeah, she's so that's what like kind of subdues her, is because she's having an allergic reaction. So he gets them both down in the basement and ties them both up. And while the kids are cleaning, they're like sweeping stuff up, and there's like broken glass that they gotta pick up, and all the trash and all the food and everything. And like literally right as the family is walking in, like they sweep off the table and push it under the table, and then they have to hide under the table because they have no time to get out. Like, that's how, like, under the wire, I forgot what the expression is. That's how close they are. So, family's coming in. Mr. Kim's stuck down in the basement. The two kids are under the coffee table. Luckily, it's a big coffee table, so they're like both hiding under there. No, wait. No. It's just Jessica under the coffee table because but then she tossed the diary because I forgot. They're looking at Dahai's diary. So he's upstairs trying to put that away, and then he has to hide under her bed. So he's up under the bed. Mr. Kim's down in the basement with the other two, with them all tied up. And, and then Mrs. Kim, she's finishing up the Ramdon and everything as they're walking in. But so he got the one guy tied up, and then he's coming back for Moon Guang, and she kind of snaps out of her allergic reaction, and she's running up the stairs to tell Mrs. Park. She's like, "Madam," and Chung Suk, Mrs. Kim, she hears the footsteps running up the stairs and acts super, like, in one smooth motion. She picks up the Ramdon off the counter, walks by the entrance to the basement, kicks Moon Guang down the stairs, and then walks over to the table to, like, serve the Ramdon. And Moon Guang gets kicked down the stairs. She, like, tumbles down, hits her head on the concrete wall, and you can hear the, like, and it's like, oh, and then Mr. Kim sees it, and he's like, oh shit, like, uh-oh, like, that didn't sound good. So he gets her, she's knocked out, pulls her into the basement, and then closes the door, because there's a little crank in there, and so he's able to close it from the inside. Obviously, if it's a bunker, you want to be able to close from the inside. So he's in there, and he's, like, getting her tied up, even though she's passed out, but then he, like, goes to move her head and feels the back of her head, and it's bleeding. And he's like, oh no, like, that's not good. But then he checks her breathing, like, he puts the finger under her nostrils, and he's like, oh, thank God. Like, so she's still alive. Like, that's good. So he hangs out there until he gets the word, like, okay, like, now's your chance. Like, because they're all, like, busy. Oh, wait, no, I missed something. So he goes back down, and he's talking to the husband, the one who's hiding out. And he hears him, like, yelling something. And he's like, oh, Mr. Park is home from a long day or something like that. Like, he's finished his duties, and he's home for the day. And then you see him, like, headbutt these buttons. Because he's all tied up, so he has to headbutt him. And you realize that there's 3 buttons for the 3 lights. And that every single day, he's the one that, like, turns the lights on as Mr. Park comes home. That's why when he was coming up the stairs, it was like 1, 2, 3. And the lights would come on as he would walk under them. So then he's also talking to him. It's like, hey, like, and then I send messages out with these lights. I can do Morse code. And so he has, like, this chart next to the buttons with all, like, the Morse code for, you know, each letter of the alphabet and everything. And so he's like, oh, I can send messages. And I talk to the son, Desong, because he's a scout. And so I'm sure he can decipher it. So then, at this point, Mrs. Kim is talking to Mrs. Park as she's eating the food and saying, like, oh, like, do you believe in ghosts? And so she's, like, intrigued, like, okay, like, what are you talking about? And she says that Desong in 1st grade saw a ghost in the house, and it made him have a seizure. So come to find out, he was down in the basement eating cake, and he turns around and looks, and he sees the the guy that's been living in the basement sees him like come up, and he thought it was a ghost, and basically he faints and has a seizure, and they have to get him to the hospital and everything. So it like that's what traumatized him, and this whole time they think it's a ghost, and it's just the guy that has been living down there. So now's the part where they get the message like, okay, like, everyone's occupied. Let's make our move. And they're trying to get out, but then everyone starts coming downstairs, like right at the, like right when they're like in the living room. So they all three have to hide under the coffee table. And then the song saying like, oh, like I want to go, I want to go camp outside. So he's brought his like teepee and he's setting it up out there in the rain, and they're like, oh, okay, like you go do that. And then the mom's all worried like, oh, like he's going to get sick, or like, I don't want him out there by himself. And Mr. Park's like, oh, like it's fine, we'll just sleep here on the couch, and that way we can keep an eye on him. And she's like, okay, like I feel better doing that. So they're laying on the couch. Mrs. Kim has presumably gone home for the day, or she's just like cleaning up, I guess. I think they think that, like, I think she's gone home for the day, basically. I don't know, though. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't really know where she is at this point. But, so the other three are down under the coffee table. So they're there on the couch. The Parks are on the couch. Kims are under the coffee table, minus the mom. And, they're having a conversation. The Parks are, obviously, not the Kims, because then they'd be caught. Saying like, oh, like, Mr. Park says like, oh, I really like Mr. Kim, but and like he always seems like he's gonna like cross the line. He comes close to it, but he never does cross the line, like of like professionalism, I guess. But he's saying like, but he has like a certain smell to him, and he's like, oh, I smell it right now. And she's like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, you never noticed that he has a smell, like. And they're like, she's like, well, what is it like? And he's like, it's not like necessarily bad, but it just kind of smells like an old radish, or like if you boiled a rag or something like that. So Mr. Kim's under the coffee table. He's hearing this, like they're all hearing this, and then he's like kind of smells himself, and it's just like feeling very like self-conscious, and also like saddened by it, because like why wouldn't you feel bad about that? And he's like comparing it to like the people that ride the subway, like that's usually where so he's basically saying that like poor people have a smell to them, and that Mr. Kim smells like that. So after they have this smell conversation, then they start groping each other, and she's like, oh, like what if the song comes in? And he's like, it's fine, like we'll be able to see him and be able to stop, like basically. And then they just start like, hey, it's like we're in the back seat of the car, and like oh, like what if you put on those cheap panties and stuff like that. So it's basically like they're poor people cosplaying or role playing to like get off on it and stuff like that. And that's like super uncomfortable for the people under the coffee table. So they're there like while that's happening. They end up falling asleep, and so then it's like, okay, now's our chance. And they get the message like, okay, they're out, like let's go. And so they climb out one by one. Kevin and Jessica get to the stairs, but Mr. Kim is like on his belly, like crawling out slowly, and he almost gets to the stairs, and then like a bright light like shines into the living room and like wakes up Mr. and Mrs. Park, and along with the walkie-talkie from the song saying like, hey, like I can't sleep, like over. And then they so Mr. Park like deals with that, like saying just like it's fine, like just go to sleep, like you're fine. So he goes back to sleep, and then Mr. Kim's able to get all the way to the stairs, and they get downstairs, they get into the garage, and they leave through the garage and make it out. And it's still raining like crazy. They're basically like running home. I don't think they're barefoot. I think their shoes were like downstairs. I think their shoes were downstairs, so they were able to get those. So they're making their way home in the rain, and it's like stuff starting to flood. Like they're coming down some stairs, and like the water's like rushing into their shoes, and then like Kevin kind of has the realization like, oh, like what does that mean for where we live? And then they finally get to their street, and stuff's flooding, and Mr. Kim points out that it's sewage water, like be careful. And he's like, oh no, like did we leave the window open? So they get back to the apartment, and it's fully flooded, and they're just like scrambling to grab stuff that's like important. Like Jessica's just given up, like she's up on the toilet, like trying to just like close it shut, because water's like sewage is just like shooting out of the toilet. And she like finds her like cigarette stash and just like gives up and just starts smoking a cigarette on the toilet, basically. Mr. Kim's grabbing his Olympic medal and a few other things, and Kiwoo Kevin just has that rock that Min gave him, and it's just like that's it, like he's just focused on that. They make it out. You see them sleeping in a gymnasium, like all the people that got flooded out are in this like refuge shelter thing. So they're laying down, and father and son are talking like we have to have a plan and stuff like that. And he's like, and then they're just talking about how plans never work out. And he says, Mr. Kim says, like, you know, the best type of plan is no plan at all. Like, because what's the point of making a plan? Because it's just going to end up failing anyway. But the sad thing is, like, the parallel of when you're seeing them, like, trying to gather stuff in the flooded house is it's flashing back and forth between that and down in the bunker where Moon Guang gets up, and she's like crawls her way over to her husband, and she's like trying to like bite through the stuff that's like tied him up, because he's tied up to some pipes, and she's like, oh, like I don't feel so good. She goes to throw up in the toilet, and she like doesn't have the strength to get back to him, and she's like, honey, I have a concussion. I got kicked down the stairs. And she's like repeating, like, remember the name Chung Suk, like that's who did this to me, basically. And it's super sad, because it's like, even though like up until now these would be the only characters you could consider to be antagonists, or like the enemies, the bad guys, but really they're not. It's like you can put yourself in the shoes of these characters, and it's just because they're opposing to our main characters that we perceive them as bad, because they're like trying to mess up their plan, basically. But so it's really heartbreaking, because you're seeing her die, and he's like tied up. He can't do anything about it. He can't hold her. He can't do anything except watch her die slowly. And so that's gonna mess you up, like no matter what. And so he's just like trying so hard to get out. He's screaming, and then she just dies right then and there. So that's really sad. That's really heartbreaking. That's flashing between that and them trying to like get the stuff out of their house. So it's just like that coupled with the music. It's just so like perfectly heartbreaking scene. Just amazing filmmaking right there. He finally does end up like getting off the pipes and everything, and this just adds more to the sadness because he is just like pounding his head on the button to like do the Morse code. And you see the song, he's like noticing the light flickering and he's starting to write down the Morse code, and he's just like HOL he's writing out help me, but it's misspelled because I'm sure in the panic that it's just like, because he's just like slamming his head onto this button and you just see blood pouring down his face because he's just like hitting it so hard. And it's just, that's really sad too. And he's just trying anything he can to like get help for his wife who is just dying. So it's the next day. They wake up. It's all sunny. Mrs. Park's looking outside like, oh, it's like a beautiful day. And then she has the idea like, hey, like camping got messed up. Let's have like a birthday party for Dasong. And so she's calling all her friends and everything like, hey, like we're going to have a party. Can you come? Like, don't worry about it. Like, no gifts or anything like that. Calls Mr. Kim, like, hey, like, I need you to drive me around because of this. So he's coming in. Calls Mrs. Kim, like, hey, like, we're having a party. Like, can you cook these things? And then, like, hey, like, Jessica, do you want to come? Like, because you're his tutor, so you should be there. And so she's coming, and then the high's like, hey, can we invite Kevin? And then the mom's like, yeah, of course. So all of them are coming to this party. It's this last minute thing. So she's preparing for that. Mr. Kim's driving her around to the grocery store. She's been on the phone like the whole time, just like calling people to get him to come. And he's very like, you could tell he's like kind of had enough at this point. And he's just like very not his usual self, just very stoic almost, and very like serious the whole time. He's got like big time RBF like while he's like driving her around. And then in the car, he notices that she like kind of like sniffs and then plugs her nose. Like, oh, like I smell that smell now. I know what my husband was talking about. And he clocks that, and you just see it go from like numbness to anger at that point on his expression. And he's just like, no, like he's on the verge of snapping at this point. And they get back, everyone's doing their job. Kevin's upstairs with the high. They're kissing, but he's like out of it. And she's like, hey, like, what's on your mind? Like, I could tell, like, and he's just like, no, like he, obviously he's not going to talk about it, but, and he asks her like, hey, do you think I fit in here? And she's like, yeah, like, I think so. Cause she's just like, you could see in her face, she's like very naive and just like, oh yeah, like I like you, so yeah, you fit in, that type of thing. Just very young and sweet and naive. And then he's like, oh, like I have something to do, and he like pulls out of his like messenger bag or duffel bag. He has the rock with him, and we don't know what's gonna happen. We see Jessica and Chung Suk are in the kitchen, and they're talking like, hey, like, what are we gonna do about the people downstairs? Like, we should just talk to them because we all like got out of hand last night and we all went nuts, so like maybe we could just talk about it now that we're calm. And she's like, Dad has a plan, but I don't know what it is. And then so she's about to take some food down to them, but then they get intercepted by Mrs. Park, and she's like, hey, like I have a job for you. And then we also see Mr. Park and Mrs. Kim, or Mr. Park and Mr. Kim they have their native headdresses on, and because it's a native themed party, and they're like behind the bushes, like, oh, like Mr. Park's like, oh, like I feel silly, like I feel like I'm too old for this, but you know, I'm gonna do it for my son. And they're just talking like, hey, like, so here's the plan. Jessica's gonna come out with the cake. We're gonna come and attack her, like fake attack her, and then Desong's gonna be the hero and like fight us off. And then he's like saved the cake and everything, and you know, just kind of like make him like the hero for the party and everything like that. So, and then they're having another conversation. They you know, they keep talking, and Mr. Kim's like, yeah, your wife's like big into these like last minute parties and stuff, and she's like, yeah, like she loves to like host and stuff like that. And he's just like, he says something about like, oh, like but you do it for her because you love her. And then Mr. Park kind of has like a funny look, like, you know, like, how about you stay in your lane? And then he says it like, hey, like, you're here for work. Like, he's not like too mean about it, but like, he's not obvious mean about it, but it's, anyone can read between the lines. It's like, hey, like, you're being paid to be here, so treat it like work. So basically it's like, I'm not your friend, I'm your boss, so don't treat me like a friend and don't talk to me like that. Don't get personal with me, basically. Like, stay in your, basically puts him in his place, you know, so to say. And so then we see Kevin, he's heading down to the basement, and he's got that big rock from Min, and he's like presumably like going down to like kill them, you know. That I don't know, like, we don't know what is gonna happen, but he gets down there, he notices Moon Guang, her body, and she's not like moving or anything, and he's like walking slowly up to her to like investigate. And then we see this like loop, like wire loop, come up over his neck, and he gets like lassoed by the husband, and like he drags him across the hallway, down the hallway, and sticks like the end of it between the pipes so he can't get out. So he's basically like a dog on a leash if he tries to like get up. But then as he's like laying on the ground, he grabs the rock and tries to smash his head, but Kevin's able to get up real quick and take off running, and he's running up the stairs, but he's dragging this like handle basically on the other end of the rope. And so right as he gets to the top of the stairs, the guy like grabs it and pulls him down, like basically like clotheslines him and pulls him down on the ground. And then he has the rock and smashes Kevin's head, like throws it down on his head. And so he's laying there bleeding. You see the guy, basement guy, I forget his name. It's like Junsei maybe, but I'm not 100% sure on it, so I'm just gonna call him basement guy. He's like grabs like a drink off the shelf, and he's chugging it, and he throws the giant jar down and everything. I think it was like plum extract or something. They drink it earlier in the movie, but I think it's plum something. So he chugs that, he throws the jar down, that glass shatters everywhere, and he picks up the rock and throws it down at Kevin's head just one more time, just for good measure, I guess. And so, like, at this point, it's like, is Kevin dead? Like, we don't know. So then he's just starts walking out. He's going through the kitchen. It's empty because everyone's outside now. Walking by the counter, and then he stops and turns back around, grabs a knife out of the knife block, and then just heads out into the backyard. And he's standing there, and then it's like, this is like another metaphor, I think, for just the class separation, because here's this guy, blood all over his face, with a knife, and no one's noticing him because they're just so wrapped up in their own lives and everything. Is just like, why would we notice this poor person, basically? And so he's there, like, looking around, and then he sees, here comes Jessica with the cake, and he runs out with the knife and stabs her in the chest. And she, like, puts the cake in his face, like, as a reflex, and just, like, falls to the ground. She's like, oh, shit, and then falls, collapses. Mr. Kim and Mr. Park pop out from behind the bushes, like, see what's going on. Basement guy, like, swings the knife around, hits some random party guest in the, like, slices him in the stomach. Hopefully it's not too deep for him. And then he just picks up Jessica's arm and like holds the knife to it and just starts screaming, "Chung-suk, come out!" basically. And she comes out and it's just like, "Stop this! Like we can figure this out." And then he, like, lunges at her. Mr. Kim's trying to get stop the bleeding on Jessica. Dasong has fainted because his ghost is standing in front of him, blood all over his face with a knife, and so he collapses. He's having a seizure. They're picking him up, like, hey, like, and then Mr. Park's yelling at Kim, like, hey, like, give me the keys, like, I gotta take my son to the, you know, like, basically, like, what are you doing saving that woman who's literally bleeding out? We got to take my epileptic son to the hospital. Like, leave her alone. Like, I'm more important, basically. And so he goes, and then he's like, finally, like, okay, like, just throw me the keys. And so he throws him the keys, but at that point, the keys get knocked down to the ground by Chung-suk tackling basement guy, and they're wrestling on the ground. The keys are under the basement guy, and they're struggling, they're fighting and everything, and Chung-suk takes the barbecue skewer and stabs basement guy in the ribs, or, like, right in the side, and just digs it, like, it's deep in there. So he's down for the count. He falls on the ground, falls on his back, and he's laying there dying, and here comes Mr. Park looking over him, and the basement guy's like, "Mr. Park, like, it's like, I finally get to meet you." And Mr. Park's like, "You know me?" Like, all confused. And then he dies, like, he laying there. Mr. Parks goes down to get the keys out from under him, and he, like, kind of rolls him over, but then he's like, oh, the smell, like, over, like, super dramatically, like, oh my god, like, he smells so bad, because obviously you would if you're hanging out in a bunker for 4 years, you know, but he's just, like, so overwhelmed with the smell that he has to, like he's, like, taken aback by it. And Mr. Kim clocks this, like, no, like, that, and it's just the final straw. Like, he's just, like, overcome with this, and, like, this has to end, and picks up the knife and stabs Mr. Park in the chest, like the same area where Jessica got stabbed. And everyone's screaming because everyone sees this. Mrs. Park, who has Dasong in her, a passed out Dasong in her arms, she passes out and faints. Mr. Kim's looking around. He sees people running. He sees his son on the High's back. She's, like, trying to, like, fireman carry him. It's like piggyback, but she's got him on her back, and she's trying to get him out. And she sees, like, the blood all over his face. Sees his daughter bleeding out on the ground, like, and his wife and everything, and he's just like, I gotta get out of here, and drops a knife and takes off down the stairs, and then we don't see, like, and then that's all we see of him for the moment. So then it cuts to Kiwoo, Kevin. His eyes are opening and he's narrating, saying like, I was in a coma for a few months, and waking up to detectives standing over his bed asking him questions, and he has this like, he's just like laughing at everything, and the doctor's like, that's something that happens after traumatic, like brain trauma, like they could just like laugh for no reason. And he's saying like, I laughed all through my sentencing. So you see him and his mom in court, and they're reading off all the charges, and then they luckily like got away with just probation, after all the stuff that they did. And it says he was laughing because then you find out that Jessica did die, and you see them at the it's one of those rooms, I guess it's a mausoleum where you're cremated, but you're like in like a room with halls, and like there's like a urn with your picture and everything like that. So they're in that type of cemetery, and the mom's crying, but he's just like still laughing, like he just can't help it, but then you find out that they're like being tailed by detectives because they're like, hey, like we don't know where my dad is, but they're like not convinced, so they're like still following him. But then he's saying like eventually like that wore off over time and everything, and then he's talking about how he would go on walks, and he would go up to the hill where that overlooked the Parks house. Obviously they moved out, like you wouldn't want to live in the house where your husband got murdered. So he's saying it was empty for a little bit. And so he would go up on this hill where he could watch it, but then one day he decided to stay like until everyone went to sleep, and then the light starts flickering. And he's like, so he pulls out his phone and he's doing like a voice memo and saying like dash basically like saying what he's seen, so that way he could later translate the Morse code. And come to find out, it's his dad snuck into the basement, like while everyone was like fleeing the party. He's like, oh, like they still don't know about this basement, so I'm gonna go down there and basically do what that other guy was doing. So he's wrote this letter. He's like talking to Kiwoo, saying like, hey, like you were a scout, so I'm hoping that you're the one that gets this message. And he's just telling them like, I've been living down here, I'm writing this to you, and I'm gonna send it out every single day. And he's talking about how he like waited till it was clear, and he was able to take Moon Guang out and bury her in the backyard. That way she got like a proper burial and everything, and wouldn't just have to like rot in the basement. And he's talking about how a German family moved in there, and that it took a while for the house to sell because like a murder house isn't going to be like off the market that quick, going to be kind of hard to sell. And so this German family moved in, and he's been like sneaking up to steal food from them, when the coast is clear, because the kids are in college and both the parents work, so they're not they're gone a lot basically. And then you see after Kiwoo was translated it, he's like writing a letter back, and he's saying like, I have a plan. I'm gonna find a way to earn money. I'm gonna earn lots of money. I'm going to buy that house, and one day you'll be able to walk up those stairs, and like we'll be together again. And we get to see like the visual of it. And we get to see like him with the nice clothes, and he's talking to the realtors, and they're showing him the house. And then we see the We see Mr. Kim coming out from the basement, and the kitchen's all empty and everything, and get to see him walk out into the backyard where he's reunited with his son and his wife. And it's a very touching scene that ends with it cuts back to Ki-woo, and he's writing this letter, and he's still in the semi-basement apartment and everything, and he's just saying, but until I do that, then just to take care until then, so it's left very ambiguous, and it's like it gives you the hope that this is the way it does turn out, but also a little bit of doubt too, because it's like they've always been trying to make a lot of money and everything, and is this were these events enough to push him, or is it going to hinder him? And it's like it is very hopeful, and I like to believe that it is the happy ending, because it's very devastating to imagine the other ending where he is never able to see them again. So, and then and that's how the movie ends. And wow, it just such an incredible movie. I just remember my heart pounding during some of those scenes, and it's such the perfect blend of comedy, drama, thriller, suspense, a little bit of horror, everything like that. And I was lucky enough, I do have the Criterion Collection edition of it, and I watched the movie, the regular movie. I put in the second disc to watch more special features, and realized that there is a black and white version of the movie on there, so you could watch it in color and in black and white. And it was feeling a little bit like a novelty, this is cool, but the second half of the movie is where it really matters. The black and white really works on that second half, because that's where it's the more suspenseful half. It is literally one half of the movie is just kind of comedy, a little bit of drama, and more lighthearted, and that second half of the movie, I think it feels like it's the exact middle point, where that doorbell rings, and that's when everything changes, and it turns into suspense and everything like that. But yeah, just great movie. One of the few, in my years of watching the Oscars, I watch it every year. They piss me off every year, but this was one of the few years where I was 100% in agreement with Parasite winning Best Picture. Most of the time, it's you got Coda, which was a good movie. That was last year's winner, but it kind of just feels like a Hallmark movie, and it was good, but not the best picture. Not the best picture of the year. Not even the best picture out of the nominees that they chose. But yeah, the Parasite 100% deserved it, and can't wait to check out more of Bong Joon-ho's movies. I've still only seen Parasite, but I hear a lot of good things about Okja and The Host and Snowpiercer. So Memories of a Murder, I want to check that one out a lot. But yeah, real big fan. I hope you guys all watched it and didn't just listen to the episode. I hope you guys stick around. Thank you for everyone that stuck through the short holiday hiatus and is still coming back after the new year. Thanks for sticking around with the new schedule. They're coming out on Tuesdays now instead of Thursdays, if you didn't notice. And yeah, hope you guys stick around next week. Stay tuned on Instagram. That's where I post where the next what the next movie is going to be. I think it goes to the Twitter and the Facebook too, but I've have more people following on Instagram than the other platforms. But yes, thank you guys for listening, and I hope you have a good week, and see you next week. Thanks.